Adventures in Mortuary Archaeology and Commemoration. It's Archaeo Death.
Welcome to this book launch. We've got a slide that says book launch, and it's definitely going to be that. My name is Professor Howard Williams. I'm going to hand over to my colleague here at the University of Chester, Professor Tim Grady, who is the director of the Research Institute for Culture and Society, to introduce us all.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Howard. I hope everybody can hear me properly there. Excellent, lots of nodding heads, so it seems to be going well. So first off, welcome this evening, and welcome to this book launch live from the University of Chester. I was really excited. I'm really pleased actually when Howard asked me if I could just say a few words in advance, just to launch things this evening, because what we have here is it's a fantastic book, Cremation in the Early Middle Ages. And I think it marks a really nice way to end what I'm sure has been for most people a really busy term doing lots of other things. But this brings us back to what is our fundamental core, and that is research, is writing, is thinking, and is sharing new knowledge. And this book does this amazingly well. So it's a reason to celebrate, and it's a reason to come together today. Now, I just want to say three things about this book that really strike me, that I think are really important to mention, because there's a lot that is so inspiring about this book and the work that Howard and Femke have done here in editing it. Now, the first of these that I want to mention, and that's not just, I want to say, it's not just the cover that's amazing, it's the three things in the book. The first of these is, this is a transnational history, and it's a work that recognises regional differences, but it's one that also, I think, goes beyond that to turn our gaze to commonalities in cremation practice. And when I look at this, we've got examples from Ireland through to the German lands in Central Europe, up to Scandinavia too. So that's marvellous. The second thing is, this is clear. I just can see from the screen here, this is a multi-team project. You know, putting a volume together involving so many different people is a massive project. It's a massive piece of work and needs to be commended. And this is a really good example of that. 19 chapters, not just 19 different people. Some of these are multi-authored chapters too, and that is a considerable piece of work there. But it's getting conversations going across different backgrounds, different countries, different universities, and that's a real achievement. So well done there. And thirdly, this is an interdisciplinary project, and that's clear too. We've got historians, we've got archaeologists, and we've got more scientific approaches as well going into the volume. So it's just, it's just an incredible achievement. It's so impressive. And I can see too, you've got the kind of unique perspectives as well, really novel perspectives in terms of how the chapters are coming together, using a lot of interview work as well. So all in all, there's three really inspiring things here that I think speak not just to archaeology, but speak to colleagues at the University of Chester and beyond. And it's for that reason that we're here today, to celebrate this achievement, celebrate this work. It's almost like launching a new boat here, but I wish this volume every success as it rides the waves and has a wonderful career ahead. So well done, everybody, and well done. I look forward to listening to the papers as we move forward this evening. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Just to give people a heads up of the structure of what we're going to be doing now. So we really appreciate Tim's introduction. We're going to have 10 minutes where Femke and myself just try and introduce what the book's about and the way we went about it. And then we'll hand over to three of the contributors, James, Adrian and Barbara. And then we're going to get a special guest talk from Yuri, and then we'll have a roundtable discussion. And during that time, if any of the audience would like to add a comment or a question that aimed at any particular individual contributor or at the round table, we will try and pick that up at any of the particular points that seem appropriate to that. Okay, so we are looking at the questions and comments, and we'll try and keep that flowing as we go forward. But I'd like to move on now, following Tim's kind words, as we do row or maybe sail, depending on the particular regional seafaring technology we're pursuing in the early Middle Ages here, out in our ship into the oceans of cremation. This is getting very much like the prose edda. Anyway, here we are. So this is obviously the book, and we want to begin by appreciating the many stages of support. This all came from a research seminar that was Femke's brainchild, building on her master's research to bring together researchers to tackle this topic of cremation in the early Middle Ages, because mortuary practices have always been a hot topic, but never as hot as when it's dealing with burning the dead and the fire rituals associated with death and disposal and commemoration. And we're very appreciative that we took this journey, and we've gained support from our universities, the Rural Riches Project funded by the European Research Council, and of course our publishers, Sidestone Press, who claim to be innovative academic publishing, which I think is an understatement, because they've got a really exciting model of producing open access material and a range of ways of accessing their publications, and we're very appreciative of all their endeavours to support us. In terms of what this book does, though, this is something that's come out of some of how this book happened. In terms of producing an edited collection is something that, unless you've edited one, you don't realise the full horrors and challenges that it involves. But trying to do one involving capturing structured interviews was something I played with in these 4 publications, which are co-produced with students as authors and editors based on public conferences organised at the Grosvenor Museum in the heart of the city of Chester, and University of Chester final year archaeology students engaging with themes in public archaeology, the relationship of contemporary society to archaeology, or archaeology to contemporary society. And some of the contributors by students are essays, chapters, but we wanted some of the big name heritage professionals and archaeologists. We wanted to capture their experience and academic research in interview form, so that we could have a distinctive style of conversation recorded in a way that you don't usually see. And so for each of these books, there are interviews with TV personalities, celebrity YouTubers, museum professionals, heritage professionals, commercial archaeologists and academics, to try and bring those voices together with the student contributors to an open access audience. And so that provided the inspiration, those 4 books, which came out in rapid succession from conferences that held between 2017 and 2020. The books came out 2019, 2 in 2020, and then 1 in 2022. And that gave us the idea that maybe we could do that with this book. And so we did, via Teams, starting in the pandemic, the joyous days, he says, with a bitter tear, of the pandemic lockdowns, and then subsequently pursuing, we organised 16, I think it was, interviews via Microsoft Teams, recorded them, transcribed them, and authors and contributors had a full opportunity to add citations, expand their ideas, provide key information boxes, and to then include images, tables, to present in a distinctive way their results. And 2 others were captured by questionnaire, and 1 other by more traditional structured discussion. But in each case, because authors had different challenges with their time and their availability, but together those 19 contributions, I think, have provided something very different we would not have got if we just asked for 19 chapters. And I think that, you can judge that for yourself, but I think we've got something very different, and I think in a positive way, by doing the book this way. But I would assure you, and I think Femke would agree with me, it hasn't been any less work doing it this way. If anything, it's been more challenging for all of us, but I think it has captured something. It hasn't been a quick route to publication, but it has been a way in which there's actually more stages where authors can reflect, editors can contribute, add questions, and we're able to produce a book. So there's all of our very happy faces, because it was a happy process, and it was a very fun process. But also, I think we've been able to produce something very distinctive, in addition to the fact that we're tackling a theme of cremation that has received many publications and ongoing research in the field, in the lab, in the library, but also a topic that really has never received for Northwest Europe a collection dedicated to this topic before. And so this is the contents of the book, and lots of chapters, cremations in almost every title, but that's what's going to happen when you have a book on this topic, but addressing different themes, different approaches, different theories and methods, and of course, as Tim rightly said, you know, the point that this is taking on a geographical span that was difficult to achieve. Now, of course, there are gaps in this geographical area and in this chronological span from the 5th to the 11th century, and we are aware that there are researchers, and that's why we invited Yuri to talk to us today, because we're aware that geographically there are other regions that are not represented. But I think we've achieved something very distinctive, and in that regard, I'd like to hand over to Femke, who can take us forward to think about some of the geographical and content issues that we've been addressing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Howard, for that lovely introduction. I'm going to take 5, maybe 6 minutes to discuss some of the central themes that emerged from the chapters in the book. First of all, this book is part of a larger trend that considers burial practices beyond national borders, BBB, as in the slide. And we asked how much we can learn if we go beyond the immediate surroundings and explore similarities as well as differences between burial communities. And as you can see on these maps, they display all of the case studies or all of the place names that our contributors have named. And we cover a large part of Northwestern Europe at least. As many will recognize, the tendency to fall back on those national boundaries in early medieval archaeology originates from century-old, outdated interpretive avenues. Many of these, such as dichotomous ethnic, religious, and status-related interpretations, are challenged by the contributors of this book. And rather than summarize each contribution, I will touch upon some central themes and highlight a few surprising examples of the kind of knowledge gained when taking such a grand approach as we have done in this book. And on to the next slide. First and central theme is the huge variability that is evident from the contributions to this book. First of all, if we contrast, for example, Finland's cremation cemeteries under level ground, we can see that it's a type of cemetery that where cremated remains are scattered in often monumental natural areas. And we can contrast this with the bi-ritual cemeteries in, for example, Frisia, Belgium, and southern Germany and northern France, where we see much more cremations in terms of urned areas or urned cremations or pits. And of course, those are very different ways of considering cremation. Another possibility is suggested by Lesse Gardela. He considers watery depositions for early medieval cremations as well. But there's also temporal differences in cremation techniques as explored by Kirsti Squires and Rika Anaert in their contributions, where they contrast Roman ways of cremating the dead with early medieval ones. And these seem to be technically very different. It seems that there's not one way to cremate in the past. And then indeed the next slide. And neither is there one way to interpret cremations. As with any burial, archaeologists are challenged to make sense of the material remains in a complex network of situational, social, emotional, and practical circumstances. And our contributors deal with these themes in their own way. John Lundqvist, for example, tackles status-related interpretations in his contribution on Sweden. A central denominator to all contribution is battling those traditional interpretations that I mentioned at the start. And another major one of these assumptions is that cremation in certain parts of Europe was not seen as early medieval at all. But increasingly, radiocarbon dating and an openness to the variability of burial rites creates fascinating stories of how people treated and curated their dead. Take, for example, here on the slide, a late Bronze Age vessel found on a late Bronze Age site and discussed by Rika Anaert in her contribution, containing early medieval remains. Paddy Gleeson, in his contribution about Ireland, Adrian Maldonado, Russell O'Regan on Scotland, Raymond Massans on southern Germany, and Anna Westman similarly discuss examples of surprising reuse or curation of cremated remains, indicating that we should be much more open and aware of cross-time curation of bones and antiques and their use in monuments and broader landscape. And Helene Agaskov-Rose takes such a long durée approach in her chapter on northern Germany. Archaeological visibility of cremation is equally a central theme discussed by Raymond Massans for southern Germany, Sarah Krah for Jutland, and Ege Knoll for Frisia, and Leslie Gardela as well for Poland. And they generally tackle the problem of cremations being deposited higher up in the soil and being ploughed, dug away, or not recognized as easily. And the next slide, please. Looking forward, new approaches to early medieval cremations call for a better integration of specialist knowledge, as Barbara Veselka definitely will tell us about in her presentation later. Be they systematic osteological analysis, radiocarbon dates, experimental archaeology, as in the contribution by Austin Mason, and but also material culture analysis, as Gareth Perrier showed with his analysis on urns. In-depth studies and exciting new insights regarding the relationship between humans and animals that are burned together, discussed by Tessel Leffelman and Sarah Krah, as well as considerations of collective, individual and individual natures of cremains in archaeological theory, as discussed by Westman. We would like to keep on spreading the fire and involve more experts from other regions to learn more about the many ways to cremate the dead. And lastly, very importantly, the book includes a warning that despite these new techniques and data, we need to be wary not to fall back onto simplistic interpretations and ward against the misuse of early medieval archaeology by groups that would use history to suit their agendas. And in a sort of perfect storm, the first of our authors to speak about their contribution to the book will be sharing a little bit about this issue. This is James Harland, and he's a research fellow at the University of Bonn in Germany, where he studies matters of the antique and the transformation of its socio-political identities, as well as their perception in the modern world. Over to you, James.
Excellent, wonderful. Well, then thank you very much, Howard and Femke, for inviting me to be in this volume and for inviting me to speak today. Another reason I think that it's appropriate that I go first is because I'm not actually an archaeologist, so I'm here to act as a warm-up act for the archaeologists, I suppose. Don't worry, the real archaeology is coming. But instead, what I am is a historian, and as you can see in this overview of the structure of my article, which I'm going to offer a bit of a whirlwind tour of, really I'm concerned with how we've approached these questions as a historiographical phenomenon in and of itself. So when Howard and Femke asked me which cremation cemetery we should revisit, I somewhat cheekily answered that the answer is Spung Hill, which is a bit cheeky because it's one of the most important and well-studied sites for investigating large-scale migration from northern Germany to Britain in the 4th and 6th centuries. It is a site which has acted as a focus for research, investigating whether, for example, new forms of material culture which appear in Britain around that time can be read as evidence for new forms of cultural or ethnic identity, Germanic, Roman, some sort of hybrid in between, and so on. As I discussed in the article, my research, mainly my book, has engaged with this sort of discourse by highlighting several problems. Problems with the unprovability of ethnic interpretation, thanks to modern ethnic sociology. Problems with assuming that Germanic identity was a meaningful category for late antique people. Assumptions that the scale of migration was a major undecided question. Newsflash, I've been accused of thinking otherwise. I think migration happened from northern Germany. In my work, I have sought instead to ask what the material that this cremation is part of can tell us if we treat these questions as not decisively answerable and we pursue other questions instead. So to turn to some of those alternative narratives, to simplify it briefly, the question is not did migration occur? The question is why did this migration at this time involve such a pronounced change in cultural expression? And my word in an answer, if we ditch Germanic, is militarization, neatly encapsulated here by Spung Man, or Spung Person if you prefer, but I think man, because I think that they are wearing a Pannonian cap, a form of Roman military costume that is found across the late antique world and indeed in the Saxon homelands. I argued that this is a useful alternative because it's compatible with our historical narrative. Gildas and Bede tell us stories of Saxons being hired as soldiers from across the North Sea. This looks like typical Roman recruitment of barbarians. This helps us, as one example among many, to treat post-Roman Britain as rather more like the other post-Roman successor states than is sometimes assumed. Why, I asked, do we need to make recourse to Germanic or hybrid identities? Those phenomena might be present in our material, but we can't prove them. Roman military identity is a phenomenon which we could, I believe, somewhat more coherently demonstrate. So to speak about why we are clinging to these narratives, that takes us to this question of politics, to which Femke just alluded. We spoke about in this interview about why scholars cling to these older narratives if others are available, and a conclusion that we reached is that this lies in assumptions about misconceptions. It lies in misconceptions and assumptions about ethnicity across society writ large. These see their most extreme manifestation, not the only one though, in far-right weaponization of early medieval scholarship. I should make very clear the far-right are loud, they are a minority, they are not the bulk of public or public engagement with this material, but they are engaging with material from early medieval archaeology, most notably in recent years DNA research, of which we have seen spectacular examples in recent years. And it's important to say they are doing so in a completely misrepresentative fashion. What they are arguing is not what the DNA research empirically proves, but they will tell you otherwise. How does that happen, though? It doesn't come from nowhere. We discussed in the article. Their ability to do this relies upon a set of frames of reference that are embedded in our general discussion about identity and ethnicity in society in general, whose roots we discussed in this article lie in 19th and 20th century approaches to scholarship, which we need to move beyond. From here, to wrap up to my final point, we discussed in my article, this interview, broader questions about how we can do heritage interpretation in general if we try to get out of these traps. And I tried to argue that one possible counter to these abuses of scholarship is to highlight that the past has no power over us. We have power over the past to interpret its complexity and represent its complexity, because the identity categories which existed in the past, race, ethnicity, and so on, are not those that exist today, which gives us the power to create inclusive narratives, such as through the identification of parallels. Howard raised one that I hadn't actually I wasn't aware of at the Norwich Castle Museum's exhibition for Spung Hill, which we were able to use to discuss the possibility that post-Roman migration to Britain looks rather more like mid-20th century post-imperial migration to Britain than traditional narratives actually assume, if we treat the Saxons as, I believe, the subalterns on a periphery of empire rather than the conquering colonizers that I think they were. These sorts of narratives are powerful because they can give modern communities a stake in the interpretation of the past by giving them things that they can relate to. I think I will wrap up there and allow us to move on to our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
My presentation today is just sort of my chapter. My involvement in this project is really a testament to the way this particular book comes together, this sort of collaborative mode of sort of iterating forward and forward from every step that Howard and Femke have mentioned already. I was brought in initially just to comment and maybe contribute a sidebar on the limited evidence for cremation north of the border in England and Scotland, you know, because I wrote a PhD on early medieval burial and I only found very little evidence of cremation north of the border at all. And where it has been found, it's traditionally lumped into these big cultural traditions like either Anglo-Saxon or Viking evidence. But the cremations that we had didn't really look like either of these. And so it goes from a sidebar, a comment on an existing paper, and then it sort of grew and grew and grew from there. I read Paddy Gleason's contribution, I read Russell Irigoyen's contributions, and it made me look back at my own data in new ways, which led to the contribution that you have here. What I'm talking about is really sort of learning to see cremation, because I'm arguing that we haven't seen very much of it because we didn't really know what we're looking for. And it's only since the sort of normal routine radiocarbon dating of lots of different contexts on any one excavation that we have started to see more. The ones that we did have at the time of my PhD more than 10 years ago now were almost accidental in some cases. We had projects like the Beakers and Bodies project, which is sort of dating the Bronze Age cremation practices, Neolithic and Bronze Age cremation practices. And occasionally they would radiocarbon date something and find that it was actually much later, much younger than they thought. So here's an example of one published by Alison Sheridan, where there's a steatite urn that, you know, was sort of discussed as a prehistoric find for many years. And then with careful work, they found out that, and they confirmed several times, that it was indeed an unexpected early medieval deposit. And so that's pretty fortuitous, but if it was just that one thing, you could kind of dismiss it. Then you start looking more and more, and you find that it wasn't just a one-off. Here's another one from the Northern Isles, where they radiocarbon dated what they thought were earlier prehistoric urns and found one from this site in Shetland, which was early Iron Age, where they're not sort of cremating people anymore, but also reusing a Bronze Age urn. And this carved stone, which has been called a Pictish stone, it's maybe dated to the 7th century, was found as the lid over another pot. There was no remains left in here. The antiquarians didn't keep it, but here's another possible example of a site where you have prehistoric, then very late prehistoric, and then finally early medieval cremations. But the problem is that none of these look like the kinds of formal deposits that you get in neighboring places, especially not in early medieval England. And then you start to get cremations that are coming out in very high profile Christian contexts. And this is something that is really covered in detail by Paddy Gleason in his recent work. He has also found in Ireland that it's on royal sites where they are very strange kind of deviant deposits of burials. And even on these very Christian sites, Christian period sites, you are getting traces of cremation of human remains. So at Fort Teviot, where you have these grand sort of monuments dated to the 9th century, very much a monastic place, very much a royal palace of people who have been Christian for a very long time, excavations there found there was not one, but 3 separate events, at least, where there was burnt human remains. In 2 or 3 cases, mixed with burnt grain. So these are cases where at this royal ceremonial gathering place, where Picts are elevating their kings and having these big ceremonies, they are also alongside sort of practicing Christian ritual and prayer and putting up Christian stones. They're also digging into and reusing ancient monuments, and in some cases cases recreating ancient practices, including those of cremation. And this is all happening over several hundreds of years. And my argument at Fortiviet was that this isn't necessarily religious or ethnic in any way, but it's actually a product of engaging with these prehistoric monuments. The choice of cremation here in these sites was dictated by the monuments that they were their ceremonies were taking place in and around. It was the material setting that led to the choice of cremation, not anything not any sort of ritual that was learned or diffused or migrated or invaded in from anywhere else. It was completely sort of responding to the material culture there. So going back to the archaeology then, with these sort of new eyes, what you find is if you take the long Iron Age approach, prehistory onwards, you begin to see these patterns of cremations popping up on sites with, generally speaking, with other antecedent prehistoric burial activity. In most cases, the early medieval dated deposits are coming out either in or around prehistoric monuments, and that's a big part of the story here. Overall, I was able to identify, and going back to grey literature and older publications, identify 32 individual cremation sites, 2 sites where it looks like inhumations and cremations are taking place at the same place, and then this wider diffuse category of what I've called burnt deposits, where there are no burnt human remains, but there are sort of offerings and charcoal scoops with burnt bone, animal bone, that can't really be called cremations, but fit into this broader pattern of early medieval monkeying about with prehistoric monuments. And they leave this sort of evidence of scoops of burnt grains, and occasionally, where the preservation is good enough, also burnt bones. Okay, and so we build this new corpus of stuff, and this is what it looks like. And the most striking result is that when you put it all together, you have almost, and again, these are broadly scattered across northern Britain, but you have what looks like an almost continuous sequence from later prehistory through to the early medieval period, all of these looking very different in every case. There's not a sense of recurring rituals or rituals being learned and then practiced at other sites. It is almost always, I found, in response to the archaeology and the artifacts of that individual site. And the choice to cremate and deposit those human remains is almost always a response to a form of archaeology that is present at that site. So what are we talking about here? We are talking about going back to the record, taking these broader sort of terms, broader time periods, a longer approach rather than just focusing on 5th to 7th or 8th centuries, and just trying to see these things in longer perspective and in their wider sort of regional context, rather than sort of honing in on just a single category like Viking burial or Anglo-Saxon burial. And I think once we start doing that, we might actually learn to see even more like this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Barbara.
Yes. Okay, cool. So first of all, thank you very much for including me in this amazing volume. I really, really liked the totally different approach. And obviously, I also very much like the focus on early medieval cremation deposits, as I am a cremation deposit enthusiast, like human remains in general. But I think it is an amazing source of information, a true treasure. And so, why is it not working? What am I doing wrong? No, it's not moving. See, so yes, we did indeed come a long way from, I think, as we all can recall, from what can we do with this material? It looks weird. Let's throw it away and keep the urn because the urn is cool and we can do some typology on it. And should we keep it at all? So sometimes there was this, yes, let's keep it, but because perhaps we can do something with it. But also, why should we care? Because it is so difficult to interpret. There are these little crumbs, and I'm super happy that over the last decade, there was really a tremendous increase in what we can do and what kind of information we can extract and actually change, like Femke already said, and Adrian as well, is that we can change our interpretations and go beyond what was always thought. So regarding the kind of the developments in the field, going from the standard, what can we say about the cremation? Usually it was basically nothing. I don't know if it goes for all the geographical areas, but usually in the Low Countries, the amount of burned bones is very low, which means that it is often very difficult to say something demographic-wise. But I'm happy to see that over the years, a lot of efforts have been put into kind of increase what we can say, improve the methods we have to just find new methods to extract more of this demographic information. But also isotopic advancement. So not only mobility, that already was a kind of a big achievement, that we could say something about the movement of peoples, but going beyond again, then seeing, okay, are they local or non-local, for whatever that means. For instance, this is a study from one of our team, Sarah Dalle, who not so much saw that there was a difference in where the food was coming from, but rather that the concentration could tell something about salt consumption. So until then, it was very difficult to say something about diet, because the usual stable isotopes, carbon and nitrogen, burn in the fire. And actually, this was a way of using strontium isotope analysis, the heavy strontium that is useful, to use it in a totally different way, to be able to say something about things like diet that we didn't know before. And the salt consumption, wow, it's mind-blowing. Another thing that was also very, very interesting is that we could use the combination of isotopes and radiocarbon. So again, strontium isotope analysis, we're still kind of confined to the strontium despite our best efforts, but we won't give up. But using strontium isotope ratios together with radiocarbon dating, we could detect multiple individuals where the basic osteological analysis was not able to do that, because I don't know if you know how it works, but usually you try to identify the pieces, and if you have more than one unique piece, so more than one left ear, then you can safely say that there are two individuals. But if you're not that lucky, you won't know if there are multiple individuals. And although everyone says minimum number of individuals is one, usually in the literature this kind of moves away from that careful notion, and everybody assumes it's one, but it may be 100. We're just not seeing it. And so developing more techniques of actually identifying multiple individuals, even though macroscopic analysis is not helping you, is also a great way. And in addition, like Femke also said, the use of radiocarbon dating also demonstrates for how long, for instance, certain fragments were curated, which we also saw. Sometimes there was a difference of 100 years, which gives you a whole different idea and notion of the retention of fragments, how ancestors or the deceased were kept alive, the memory of the deceased were kept alive within the community. And my private pet project, we can also see vitamin D deficiency, which was not possible before. So it is extremely difficult to find pathological conditions in cremated remains, since the burning process has destroyed much of the information, but also the incompletion or the level of incompleteness of the individual makes it extremely difficult to do any form of differential diagnosis. But I found that vitamin D deficiency, visible as mineralization defects in the teeth, is still visible in cremated teeth, which is a tremendous step forward for our analysis of disease load and how this affected early medieval society. And just ending with the case study of early medieval Echt, because all the other ones are from way before. The interesting thing about this study was that we applied strontium isotope analysis, and as you can see in the chart below, so in the left corner is the geology and the strontium ratios that occur naturally within that region, and then the right bottom is the results basically of this analysis, and you see a high diversity. And if you don't have the good baseline, if you don't compare to a decent baseline, you will think, oh, none of them actually were local, but they were. And I think the complexity of the geology shows and gives you the idea these were distributed households, potentially these farms, that would characterize the early medieval landscape. But apparently dying and death was a communal factor that in the end brought back people to be buried at the same location. And there actually were a couple of significant distant travelers that apparently needed to be buried at the cemetery of Echt. And this is this is the end of my story. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to Barbara, and thank you again to James and Adrian, the three of our authors sharing their perspectives on their contributions. And just to say, before I introduce our next speaker, our special guest, we have 5 more of our contributors, Eka, Helen, Lezek, Raymond and Sarah, who are in the audience, among our presenters tonight. So they will be coming back and contributing, I hope, to the roundtable discussion at the end. But at this point, I'm very pleased and delighted to be able to welcome Professor Yuri Machacek, who is able to give us to extend our geographical bounds. As I admitted, we couldn't cover everything and we were stretched as it was, but it really helps to show the exciting ongoing research that beyond the geography into further parts of Europe that we didn't address in the book. But I really appreciate him joining us this evening.
Okay. So, hello everybody. I am really very happy I could be a part of the celebration of this wonderful book, yeah. And I'm a little bit sad that I cannot be a part of this author collective, because it is extremely interesting and important book. But I hope I can present you now a little bit from our archaeology and our research about the cremation rites in East Central Europe from the 6th to the 9th century. And yes, I try to move to the key topics. Okay, my task is now to present a short overview over this, let's say, cremation burial in the East Central Europe. It should be perhaps a little bit more tradition, but perhaps you can appreciate this overview. Also, first I would present some funerary practices in the East Central Europe at the time. Then I would discuss the origin of the early medieval cremation rites in this East Central Europe, and some new discoveries about the dating of the transition between inhumations to cremations and back to the inhumations during the early medieval time. And then I would present our new discoveries, some burial mounds with cremations in South Moravia region, and some analysis of organic residue from ceramic urns. Also, now let's move to the funerary practices in the East Central Europe. I have to say that the migration period time is connected with the inhumations, which were traditionally connected with this last Germanic tribes like Lombards, and the beginning of the early Middle Ages are connected with this, let's say, change, transition to the cremation rite, which should be traditionally connected with this new Slavic population. And of course, you can see it at this map, where on the left side you can see the distribution of, let's say, Germanic tribes of Gens, and also this typical Slavic material culture connected with this Prague Korčak groups. I would be I focus in my presentation South Moravian region, which was an area where overlapped all these groups or these traditions. We have here, you can see here on the left side below, the distribution of so-called Lombards inhumation burial grounds, and the same region which was covered with this Slavic cremations and Slavic settlements. On the right side, you can see the distribution of this Slavic cremations over the Central Europe, from the south western Slovakia to the Moravia to Bohemia and to the eastern Germany. Most of the Polish area is empty because there are not so many cremations, cemeteries or burials identified till now. Yeah, I move now. Yeah, to the some examples of this cremation burial grounds from Moravia. It means from the eastern part of the Czech Republic. They are generally small, like this example from Pohansko near Břeclav, where we have about 50-60 graves. Some of them are already in very simple pits, but some of them are in ceramic urns, in vessels. Some of them are undecorated, so-called Prague type pottery, handmade ceramic, and some of already decorated pots.
Yuri, I think you muted yourself. Can you unmute yourself?
I'm trying to unmute him, but he seems to have...
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Do you hear me? Yeah. Sorry,
yes, we hear you.
Yeah.
Can you start
Okay.
again from this slide?
Yeah, from this, yeah, or
Yeah.
last one. Yeah, this one. Okay, sorry. I speak about the examples of this cremation burial grounds, and this one from Šitluky, from South Moravia, is the largest in the whole Central Europe. It is more than 400 cremations. But some of them are flat, some of them are under the flat or a small burial mounds. You can see it on this picture on the right side below. And yeah, of course, there are also some inhumations, and it is quite interesting that one of them is buried with a sax. It means it is somebody who connected with the Western Merovingian culture. Yeah, next one. Yeah, also, what is actually the origin of these cremations in East Central Europe? Yeah, according to very traditional explanation, you can see here the situation at the end of the migration period with these ethnonyms like Gepids, Lombards, Heruls, Rugis. They should be the people who had inhumations, burial rites. Sometimes during the 6th century in the southeastern Europe and Central Europe appeared the people which are called in written sources as Antes or Sklavines. It means the Slavs. Archaeology very traditionally connected these people with the specific material culture, with these very simple pots of Prague type and specific houses. There are this Grubenhauser with the stone oven in the corner, and and this ceramic is very similar on the huge area from Ukraine to Moravia and to Eastern Germany. You can see here some examples of these vessels, which were also used as the urns in the cremation burial grounds. Now it is the question, of course, if our archaeological model, it means this material culture, we could really connect it with this living culture in some ethno-linguistic groups. It is, of course, a big challenge for us. Actually, this the Czech, Polish, or Slovak archaeologists described a specific Slavic culture model, which could mirror the habitus of these people. And you can see here some of the important characteristics of this culture model. It means some type of settlements, type of housing, economic model, and one very important point is the funerary rite, which should be characterized by cremation graves. This is also some overview made by Nadia Profantova. You can see here the distinguished feature from various regions from Central and Eastern Europe, which are connected with this Prague Korčak culture, and cremation graves are every time very important feature in this description. Yeah. Also, the question is, and this is a very challenging question, if we can interpret such a culture model as a migration of people or change of the local habitus. Also, it means if we can connect it, this archaeological culture from the 6th, 7th century with the people who are speaking Slavic languages up to date. Yes, we have to say this, that the Slavic language is a part of the Indo-European languages, but it is actually, according to also last models, linguistic models, the very late, which was one of the last separated from the generally Indo-European languages. According to glottochronology, these people speaking these Slavic languages they separated at the beginning of the Middle Ages in separated groups, Eastern, Southern, and Western Slavic groups. Of course, in the last time we try also by the archaeogenetic identify what's happened actually, if really we can speak about the migration or some more local stable people. Now I would say something about the dating of the transition between this inhumation and early medieval cremations. It was already published a large set of inhumations from the great migration period from the Central European area, and we try to collect new data from this early medieval cremations. Also now we can compare both groups all together, and you can see here that the inhumations from the great migration period are really earlier than the later cremations, which we connect with the Slavic migration. But the gap is actually minimal. It is very close together. And yes, we try to develop a specific chronological model with Bayesian statistic. You can see here at this picture where actually the timeline is quite clear, that we have some pre-Lombards occupation in South Moravia and northern Austria and Slovakia, then this Lombards period, and then the Slavic period, which was connected with this change in the barrier route, right, to the cremations. We try also to verify such model by the dating of the lipids found in the ceramics, and it looks like that of really these vessels are fit in our chronological model very well. And now the next step was actually the transformation of these cremations back to the inhumations. Generally, we think that this transformation started at the end of the 8th century and the 9th century in connection with Christianization. But we have identified some earlier inhumations. One of the earliest known human skeleton directly connected with this material culture associated with the early Slavs was found in Pohansko site, our excavation, where we found in the pit a skeleton of a small child together with the ceramics, typically of the Slavic form, traditionally so interpreted, which is dated to the 7th and 8th century AD according to radiocarbon dating. This is something what is not really connected with the cremations, because we have no archaeogenetic analysis of the cremated bones, but we try now identify some shift in genomes between the latest inhumations from the migration period and the earliest skeleton graves from the early Middle Ages, which are dated to the 8th and 9th century. And you can see here it is still unpublished results, but it is quite obvious that we have here really differentiation in the population between 5th century and 10th century. This Great Migration population was very heterogeneous, covered the people which are related to today North European and South European and Western European. It was really a mixture of very different ancestries. However, this, let's say, early middle population, which we connect with Slavic population, is more related to the Ukraine, Polish, White Russians, and so on. Also, it fits quite good in this, let's say, traditionally interpretation of these people groups. Yeah, we move on, and we have development in this burial rite, and yeah, the cremations which are dominant in the 6th, 7th, and 8th century change to the inhumations. It is an example of a very interesting burial ground in Czechia Center, Slovakia, where a part with cremations changed to the inhumations, and we can identify actually the first inhumation on this huge burial ground, which is dated around 900 or in the second half of the 8th century AD. And this is the time when this population go back to the inhumations, let's say, or when the burial rites changed back to the inhumation from the cremations. And since the 9th century, the people buried with the inhumation rites. It is the question if it was, let's say, influence of the Christianity or Avars, nomadic tribes living in the Carpathian Basin with inhumation graves, or internal development of the society. Yeah. And now a little bit about new discoveries we made in this area of border situation between this Avars, Frankish and Slavic part of Europe. It is on the border of today Austria, Czech Republic and Slovakia, where we have this Slavic cremations burial grounds. And in the new time, last time, we discovered with lidars and so on, new unknown burial mounds with cremations, very nice visible on this lidar. And you can see here this is a very typical layout of burial mounds of this early medieval type in Central Europe. These burrows are very nice lines, yeah, and there are dozens or sometimes nearly hundreds of them. And we excavated one this burial ground in Bernardsthal in Austria, and we chosen two of these burial mounds, and we have excavated them. You can see the dimensions of these burial grounds. They are not very high, but quite large. And what was interesting, we have in such burial mounds 3 types of cremations burials. One type you can see of this grave number 3 on the left side. It is there are very disappeared bones of one individual on big area, and on the right side you can see 2 types. One grave was concentrated on one place, yeah, the bones, and the second grave was in the urn, in the vessel. Yeah. Also you can see in one mound on the top where this cremated bones only very free disappeared near to the surface, and the secondary grave in the area of the lower part of the mound was in the vessel, in the urn. And yeah, you can see the distribution of various bones in this vessel, and what all these 3 burials or 2 burials and 3 graves were dated, and you can see here this radiocarbon dating. They are now official, actually the oldest early medieval cremations we have from Central Europe, and also the oldest burial mounds of that time. What is interesting is also the construction. We have simple burial mounds, but also some burial mounds with construction, and this is this plan of such burial mound, yeah, and you can see that they are surrounded by ditches, and inside was a construction of posts. And this is something typical for these burial mounds with cremations in this Slavic area, that they were actually not round, as we can imagine, but square. Inside of this burial mounds are square construction, wooden construction. Sometimes we found the post holes. Sometimes we found really the wooden charcoals of this construction, buried wooden construction, and we can make some imagination of the construction of such burial mounds. There were actually not mounds, but perhaps the houses which were filled with the soil, and on the top of such mounds or constructions, let's say, where these cremations located. On this map made by Michal Lutowski, you can see the distribution of these burial mounds in Central Europe. Not all of them were with the cremations. Some of them were also already with the inhumations, but most of them were with cremations. Especially here in Bohemia, in South Bohemia, is a huge concentration of this cremation burial mounds. And now we come to some problems which are connected with this ethnic interpretation of these cremations in this part of the Europe. Yeah, you can see that on one of this burial mound were located the parts of the fittings from typical let's say parts of the male rims, and you can see that we have here some typical fittings from the Merovingian and Frankish type, together with Avar fittings. Yeah, and both this type of the fittings were connected with the cremations in burial mounds. Also, it was really a mixture of material culture and mixture of burial rites in one place, in one grave. Also, it is really interesting how does it work. Yeah, and we have also analysis from the last time of the organic residues from these cremation urns. We compared the settlement ceramics from the let's say late Germanic pottery from the 4th, 5th century with this early medieval pottery from settlements, but also from the burial graves, urns. And what is interesting, that the ceramic, the pottery which was used as cremation urns were previously used really for cooking, and we can identify, of course, the food which was cooked in these vessels before they were secondary used as cremation urns. Also, quite interesting thing. Also, if I can go to conclusion, also this cremation burial rite dominated in the Slavic part of East Central Europe between 550 to 800 AD approximately. And yes, the traditional explanation is that the transition in this burial rite from inhumation to cremation, we can connect it with the population replacement. But on the other hand, if they change back to the inhumation, it should be actually with the same population. Yeah, also it was inner development, and this change back to the inhumation came between 700 AD to 800 AD. We don't know why, if it was because of Christianization or Avar or Frankish influence. It is still open question. The food vessels were secondary used as cremation arts according to organic residue analysis of the urns. Okay, so I think it is ever what I can say you. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuri, for packing so much in. New field work, scientific applications from radiocarbon dating to organic residue analysis. What a rich treat for us, and thank you so much. I'm going to now hand over to Femke to take forward the roundtable discussion and maybe field some questions if there are any in the chat for our speakers so far.
Yes, super. Thank you so much, Yuri. I learned a lot and I was flabbergasted at many points of your presentation. And I will open the round for questions, but while everybody's thinking or typing their questions, I will have my own first question for you, Yuri, because the way that you present it, and as you've shown, there's like a really clear separation of the inhumations and cremations when they occur on the same sites. Like, I've never seen anything like it. It's incredible. My question was, are there any cases where there is an overlap or they occur kind of like next to each other or even in the same grave? And how is that interpreted as well, if this is such a stark, difference?
Yeah. I spoke already at the burial ground in Chitluki was a grave, one skeleton grave with sacks. A very typical Merovingian one. Yeah, of course it is big question if this particular grave was somebody who is traveled from the Western Europe to this area, because we know it from the written sources. As, for example, the Lombards from Italy moved sometimes to the Slavic side and back and so on. So it was the world was open in that time, but much more connections between inhumations and cremations is between Avars and Slavic people. I didn't so much speak about the Avars, but the Avar in the Carpathian Basin in the Hungary, there are thousands of inhumations. Yeah, they were typical, but on some places they're mixed with the people who were cremated. And we have, for example, the situation when it is a Avar inhumation, and in the same grave, in one part of them is cremated bones. Yeah, and the interpretation of this is that it was Avar, a man, and his wife was Slavic origin, and they were buried together in one grave. Yeah? It is such kind of the explanation. And we have also some spiritual burial grounds in southern Slovakia on the edge between this Slavic zone and Avar zone. There are some burial grounds which are really spiritual mixed together, but the cremations are only, let's say, a few percent. Yeah, very few.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Yeah, I have other questions, but I also want to let other people have their questions. One from Frans Theus about your cooking pots. Frans, can you speak?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, Yuri, I was very surprised by your cooking pots. It reminded me of a paper, never published, unfortunately, that I gave years ago, which was called Cooking the Dead. Because in the cemeteries in the northern part of the Frankish kingdom, where Femke and me were active, we have a very specific distribution of the types of vessels in cemeteries. Well, You have inhumation cemeteries. Predominantly inhumation cemeteries, you will never find cooking pots, which we can distinguish from the tableware. If you have cremation cemeteries like the famous Renen cemetery, the cremations are in cooking pots, mostly are in cooking pots. So I was elaborating on this to show what other types of values could be related to the cremation ritual, independent from ethnic identities and Christianity or heathen people. So if you change the pottery from inhumation to cremation to tableware to cooking pots, there must be a relation with important transformation processes of the body, either of an animal, that food is never eaten raw, it's cooked. And this is a very important transformation, which is visible in the English language because you have cows and beef and pigs and pork. We don't have that in Dutch language, the difference. So there must be, I don't know how the relation is, but there must be interesting relations between thinking and the values of treating the body and dealing with meat as food. So, and both are concerned with major transformations of the body or of the animal, which is maybe completely ethnic independent thinking, which might be one idea circulating in Europe. I will come back to it when I have the opportunity to make some remarks on the pan-European circulation of ideas. So this was what occurred to me when you have also cooking pots and cremations and so on. So that's it.
Yes. No, thank you. This is very interesting notice, and yeah, I agree. What is interesting, perhaps I compared one time the vessels, the size of the vessels from the inhumation and cremations barriers, and it is obvious that that time the vessels used for the cremations were much bigger, larger than the vessels used in this inhumation graves. Yeah. Also, perhaps it is because they need a bigger volume for the bones. Yeah. It's container. Therefore, they used larger pots. Yeah. But it is statistical obvious that the differentiation existed.
That's amazing. It also makes me immediately think of the contribution by Gareth Perry, who also speaks about, he's done analysis on the urns in the north of England or Middle England. And he has found that the urns were used for fermentation and probably some kind of beer making before they were used as urns. Yeah. And okay, Howard is saying he's arguing something similar in his talk that he's going to do tomorrow. So that sounds very interesting as well. Let me switch back to the questions. Let's see if there's any more. Yes. So I also had a question about, I think, was it Bernhardstahl with the mounds in like very sort of, structured ways. So Howard's question is, how many of these mounds were excavated? And how many show these complex features of ditches and structures, and might be missing lots of structures in, well, I presume often, at least in our regions, the sort of above burial parts are not preserved, and so we don't find these things. And what's your idea about it? Does every cremation have such a structure, or is this a very special site?
No. Actually, we estimate that this barrier, this mounds with this construction were some specific. perhaps it was some social differentiations. Yeah, we have a geophysical measurement of the all area of this burial ground, and we can identify the graves with this construction. And there are actually 2 or 3 of them, and one we have excavated. Yeah, also we and altogether there are about 35 mounds. Yeah, 3 of them were with this construction. The other were very simple. Only mounds, soil mixed together with cremated bones. Also, we think it should be some kind of the monumentalization of these graves. Yeah, of course the construction above, it is only our interpretation. Yeah, but we have this square construction on actually in all Slavic mounds which were excavated. Yeah, also it is perhaps something like the house of the dead or something like this. Yeah, it is very typical, and sometimes we have also these ditches around them. Yeah, it was excavated in various sites in Bohemia, in Moravia as well. Sometimes it is on the field where these mounds disappeared already because plugging and so on. But we can see in the soil these ditches as rest of this construction of the mound. Also, it is a typical feature, let's say, for these people and this specific construction of the burial mounds.
That's amazing. Thank you very much. Yeah, we also have some of these structures. I think Ege also discusses them in his contribution, but I believe from the scale of things, they're much smaller than what you've shown us, Jiri. Yeah. But it's very interesting to think about, because what does it imply about people returning to the site, people remembering their ancestors, you know, and especially as we've talked about in previous contributions today as well, about the curation of the dead and over longer periods of time. And that was my question as well. How quickly are these mounds or these structures added to? Like, is it a long period of time, or is it just in 50 years they all pop up? Because it seems so structured and so sort of organized, as if somebody took a ruler and kind of went like, yeah, this needs to go there. So yeah, exactly, about the temporality of the mounds. And then I will ask if somebody else wants to ask a question.
I think according to our radiocarbon dating, they lasting at least 200 years, let's say. And what is really interesting, this situation with the secondary grave in the urns. Yeah, there is a really differentiation in the radiocarbon dating. Yeah, also it was a secondary grave on the round, and it looks like that this construction, this wooden construction, was already destroyed. Yeah, it was not more standing, and they put the secondary graves in the destruction, let's say, of this house of dead, let's say. Yeah, and you know that there are some parts of Moravia and Bohemia, the central parts, where this transition to the inhumation started earlier. It was central parts with elites, central places, yeah, and the earliest churches where the Christianization started and so on. And this burial mounds with cremations disappeared very quickly. But in the peripheries, yeah, in some higher areas, highlands and so on, the people buried in the traditionally style longer. Yeah, it is. Yeah, this typical issue of the central peripheries. The people of the peripheries were more traditionally.
Fascinating. Any more questions from our contributors? You can unmute yourself and speak freely. just give them a second.
Well,
Okay.
if I may, Barbara showed us the cemetery of Echt. That is fantastic result for that cemetery. But that cemetery came as a huge surprise to us archaeologists, because I don't know whether Rika is still listening, but in her dissertation she said cremation ritual is something from the coastal area, the Scheldt Valley, and it doesn't happen in the Meuse Valley. She couldn't. As soon as she finished her sentence on that, we discovered the Echt cemetery, or a company, and Femke and I did a lot of sieving and do the pottery from the cremation graves, and it turned out it was so unexpected that it was considered a late Roman cemetery, but it is undoubtedly a 6th century cremation cemetery, which may turn into an inhumation cemetery in the 7th century. And there are about 60 of these cremation graves, which is tripling or quadrupling the number of cremation graves known from the entire area in just one cemetery. So one discovery can completely change the ideas about the relations between cremation and inhumation. And maybe it is caused, in this case, we have to really go into more detail later, maybe because of the conservation circumstances, which I don't believe is really the reason, but maybe there are many more of these. But yeah, and then we were lucky, I must say, that we got Barbara for doing all this work on this exceptional. But we were really flabbergasted by just one discovery that completely changed our idea about the nature of how we should think about it. The burial rites in a completely inhumation region burial rites. So yeah, that's, and now I saw the results again, and I think how lucky we are.
Oh yeah,
Lucky.
absolutely. If I may respond, you're absolutely right, Frans. It's also I kind of put all the surrounding cemeteries. I put it in a map, and it's like all inhumations, and one of them, a few of them have additional cremations, and Echt is like this lone ranger with a huge amount of cremated remains. It's unbelievable. So I don't think the last of the story is told yet, but yeah.
But without your research, this would have been an invading German group from across the border.
Yes.
You show that's just local people.
Yeah.
They live there, and they are dying there, and they eat there in the region. And that is fantastic, because in a traditional sense, this would have been a heathen bunch of people from across the Rhine. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And Barbara, do you think, because for now Echt is unique with its 60 graves, do you think that this is because of the preservational circumstances in the area? Are we just missing all of these cemeteries that also have so many cremations? And also for the other participants, what's that like in your area? Do you think preservation, or even the narrative of this idea that cremation doesn't exist in your area in the early Middle Ages, had an impact of how many we've identified? Yeah.
So to answer preservation, I don't think so. I think it is about not being able to recognize the cemeteries, so they are not always very obvious. And also, and that is especially for the Low Countries, and in particularly Belgium and the Netherlands, is that the excavations take place because there is some building activity, which means hardly ever is there an academic excavation. It's almost always rescue excavation, which means that if you have space, you won't start building in beautiful green space, which means I won't be surprised if a lot of that area, which is beautiful green and should actually stay that way, could contain more of these cemeteries and tell us way more about how life in early medieval times was. So preservation, I don't think so, because I think the Belgian, especially the Belgian soils, are famous for the acidity, and they just melt all the skeletons away, but the cremated remains are, you know, firmly standing strong. So those are actually the ones that we can find. So I think it's more of, where are we digging? Why are we digging there? And that strongly influences our perception of early medieval settlements, early medieval cemeteries, because it's just like Frans said, this was lucky. We were extremely lucky.
Amazing.
Can I just add a point there, please? I don't want to speak for other researchers who aren't able to join us, but I'm aware, just to add to this point, that one of the yawning geographical gaps in our book is Western Britain. We've got Irish and Northern British and Southeast British contributions, but I know that there's ongoing work done by one of our contributors, Kirsty Squires at the University of Staffordshire, together with Andy Seaman at Cardiff University, identifying early medieval cremations in Wales and Western Britain more broadly. So that'll be exciting. So, you know, it's shocking that in 2020s we're still trying to fill in yawning geographical gaps, as well as new techniques, new approaches, new ideas.
Can I jump in off the back of that? Well, I mean, in the region that I covered in Northern Britain, a big problem is simply visibility, because because there's this expectation that there is no early medieval cremation in Northern Britain, that when we do find it, it's more than likely prehistoric. And so up until the 90s, when radiocarbon dating was still expensive and prohibitive for most community projects and smaller scale excavations, what you have is, if you found a fire pit with cremated bone in it, it was just assumed to be prehistoric. And if there was an urn with a cremation deposit, again, even more so. And what we found once we started being able to target these things, well, the Beakers and Bodies project in particular kind of begins targeting those things for radiocarbon dating, but that's a research project with an aim in mind, a certain kind of prehistoric burial deposit. It's only when the commercial units and developer-led excavations begin to be able to radiocarbon date routinely lots of different deposits from across the stratigraphic relationship of the entire site, that you begin to notice that some of these things are indeed sort of contemporary rather than sort of prehistoric. And the one example that I showed, that I spoke about in a research excavation at Fortivia, this royal center, we started finding, and this was coming up in a lot of the trenches actually, we started finding a lot of residual burnt bone, or at least what we thought was residual. And so that was how it was written up in context sheets. That's how it was spoken of on site. The assumption was that these early medieval features had maybe accidentally cut into prehistoric deposits with cremation material, and is only in post-excavation stage. And again, none of this looked terribly early medieval. It looked prehistoric. One of them was in a Bronze Age kist. It was only when we started routinely going back in post-excavation and dating all of the fire pits, dating the burnt grain, and dating the deposits from the Bronze Age kists, that we started to realize that there was more than just an accidental inclusion here, more than just residual material there. And so that, so that has now sort of been an eye-opener, at least for me, and that's part of the message that I'm putting out in the paper, is that we have to treat all these things sort of separately, and not just sort of target things for dating, but employ as much as possible a kind of randomized, proportionate dating strategy across every layer of the site.
Yeah, 100%. I was immediately reminded during your presentation of Paddy's example as well. With he's found almost the exact same situation with Tara, also kind of like a monumental site where there's early medieval random cremations in this monument, which is super exciting. And how amazingly crazy is it that over such large distances, Adrian, you spoke about Bronze Age vessels with early medieval cremations. We've got some in Belgium. I would just wonder, when we start systematically dating, as you say, how many of these are going to pop up? Like among the enormous Iron Age cremation sites that we have in the Low Countries, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those are going to be early medieval. So we're just blind to it, and I'm really excited to see where this is going, and yeah, how we're gonna, what we're gonna find in the future. Maybe many more people were cremating than we originally thought. So, yeah. Does anybody have a similar experience from their region in terms of preservation, or not even preservation, in terms of the narrative about the early Middle Ages kind of constricting the interpretation, or similar examples of misdated cremations? So far, no. I was reminded of Raymond's maybe example. If he in his article, he also discusses one of these out of place cremations. Okay, fair enough. I'm just checking the questions. Okay, then for the next topic, which I found very interesting as well, is this sort of ability of what you can do with cremations that you can't do with other things. And this adds to the previous point, where the curation of bones, things being kept overground for much longer, is kind of, well, maybe not even unique to cremations, because it happens with inhumations as well. If you think of reliquaries, even in Christian times, this is happening. But it seems to be part of a much longer traditions, or a much longer, habit of people wanting to be connected to their ancestors, coming back to the burial rites, to remember their dead in very specific ways. And I also was reminded of sometimes we find very few bones, and maybe this is a question we can tackle together, is when do we consider something a grave? Is a few bones, is that a grave? Or how do we consider that? And this also comes down to the individuality of cremated deposits. So anybody who would like to jump in on that is very welcome to.
If I may, I think the whole concept of cremated remains, the part is suitable for reciprocity, which means exchange of pieces, connection with the dead and the living. And I think because we are missing so much, we can't really fathom how much this was, but I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, a few bits ended up in a Portland River, or a few bits on a mountain, or a few bits in any of the other cremated remains, which were simply missing because, like I said, because the osteological analysis is not picking up on it. And to, you know, radiocarbon date every fragment, I don't think that anyone would give money for that. So I think the nature of cremated remains is about reciprocity, is about exchange, is about keeping and then reburying. And then, so yeah, I do think that that cremation is very suitable for that. And I wanted to say something else. What was your last question? It eluded me. What did you say last? Like, can we tackle this question together?
What was I going to say? About ancestors and curation specifically, or?
It was also about how many pieces of bone, how much % of a body does it take
that was
before you
it.
call
Yes,
something a
thanks
grave?
very much.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you. So I heard a very interesting concept where sometimes we focus too much on what is there. So often or maybe we should look at what is not there, because that is being kept. So yes, I do believe that one fragment already makes a grave, because if you can remember a person with one fragment, why shouldn't it be a grave? What is a grave? And so our whole concept of what is a grave, how do we think about grave? And is grave the most important thing? Or is it just something we, in the end, find? So is that the only archaeological thing we find? So actually, I wouldn't be surprised if there are mounds that seem to be empty, and actually they may not be, but just no one put something in it, but maybe just memories. And obviously this is very philosophical and fantasy rambling on, but I think if we start looking at looking at presence of stuff differently, then a grave is a place to remember or to mark a loved one, and then it might not be even important what is in there.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree.
If I can jump in with maybe what sounds like an irrelevant modern example, but I think it really kind of reflects a human approach to deposits like this. There's a really sort of a really important but quite a heavy visit museum in New York City. It's the September 11th Memorial Museum. And of course, what they have on display is a lot of twisted iron, twisted steel from the buildings and everything like that. But there's also a lot of personal items, okay? There's people's wallets, things that were found on site, things that people donated on behalf of their loved ones. But then there are also displays including things like shop fronts, an entire shop front covered in dust. And there are things like these. And I remember seeing the displays and the labels being very careful to say, we have analyzed the dust that you can see on display here and made sure that it doesn't contain human remains, that it is actually just ash. And we've made sure that nothing that you can see actually has microscopic amounts of human bone in it. You know, so they were very clear to say that. The meaning of that being, if it had any, even if it wasn't terribly apparent, if it had any, when they looked at it under the microscope, that they would not display it. Even though you are in this space where a lot of death happened, you know, that you are surrounded by death and you are surrounded by, as it were, grave goods, you know, the things that people had in and around them when they died. Despite that, it was just the presence or absence of the human remains that kind of made it go from suitable to display to unsuitable to display. And there was this sort of, I would argue, though, that actually means that we are very confused about how we think of graves, you know, and how we approach the dead ourselves. I think we are kind of conflicted, and our brains are divided in that way, where we can look at something that somebody was wearing when they died and say, that's not a person. But if we think that there might be human remains, we say that is a person, even if it's just microscopic specks of bone. So I think there's a lot more psychological really going on, and emotional. You know, these are intense emotional deposits, funerals, graves, and we can't expect everybody to sort of, as it were, act rationally in these kinds of ways, or at least in ways that we would consider logical.
Can I say something about this, which develops this thought about particles of human beings as being whole human beings? Because if we move from the practices to the ideas behind these practices, there might be shared ideas for both practices, because we have this whole tradition of reanalyzing the reopening of graves, inhumation graves in Europe. There's a whole bunch of interesting researches that form a group on the reopening of graves, transforming it into a cultural practice instead of being just robbery. And they are taking out bones. Everyone was looking at the objects that were taken out, but it is obviously that there was a lot of bones taken from the graves. Now, if I start with the remark by Barbara that you can distribute bones that are cremated more easily than inhumation bones, but this overwhelming reopening of graves in the late 6th and 7th century to collect bones is the same idea. You can distribute bones from the single person over different places, and each bone will represent the complete person. And we know this idea from the early Middle Ages because we call them saints. You have the head of a saint in maybe 10 places. You can go, yeah, if you sample all the wood from the cross of Jesus Christ, then you have a whole forest, not just a cross. So, and this relates to the concept of the distributed person. You can be as a person present at different places at the same time, represented by parts of your body. And this this concept of the distributed person is fastly developing into Western Europe in the Christian church, dealing with relics. But why not? I sometimes have the idea that the Christian church is stealing this idea from the people in Northern Gaul who were doing this already before the Christian church got the idea. So you can do this with cremation bones, but they probably did it the same with the remains of inhumations. And both practices, which we archaeologists would consider completely different practices, are maybe based on the same idea, on the same underlying idea. And that's what I try to do with Femke and with others, to get to these underlying ideas behind different practices. So that's and that's the same with the thinking about particles of bodies in New York. They are considered a whole person, not just a tiny particle of a body. And that is, I think, crucial to thinking also about cremations. You're right.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the first time that a religious organization comes in and kind of claims certain practices as its own. Before we move to the sort of roundup of the discussion, I have one sort of major, big, scary question to ask. And I had it on a slide, but in the end, I'm just going to say it to you in this manner. And it's early medieval cremations should be considered outside of an ethnic framework. And what is your reaction to this statement? Anyone who would like to? Yeah.
Well, mine is yes.
Mine too. I was going to say that as well, and James was very fast on that as well.
I mean, I suppose the way that I would react to this is that the problem is that there has been a tendency to treat that as the default through which we sort of force our analysis, and that has had the tendency to railroad how all of the other pieces of evidence that we collect and gather then become framed, and how narratives are constructed. I suppose that my argument would always be these arguments are never impossible. Even with the vast sum of different kinds of material, DNA, distribution maps, ethnonyms, etc., all coming together as a collective, there remains, I would say there always remains this epistemological barrier that prevents us from getting into the sort of habitus that we would need to in order to see ethnic expression at work. Now, I suppose when you begin going along those lines of inquiry, the answer that one might make is, okay, we can say that about any form of social identity expression with respect to the material record, and I take the point. But so when there is a sufficient coherence of different types of research, evidence that enable this, yeah, okay, fine. But our tendency to have treated this as a default in prior stages beforehand, it perhaps has led me to desire privileging not treating it as the default from the outset. I imagine others would agree, but
yeah, 100%. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's almost as if when you start talking in those terms in our area, then you kind of flatten the debate and you stop looking for interesting differences between cremations and cremation practices, because I was also reminded of the stark differences between the Roman way of cremating and the early medieval way of cremating. I'm hugely fascinated to see with Jiri if his cremation technologies are different from our cremation technologies. Do they burn the bones much hotter? Do they use different woods? Maybe that's part of just the local geography and the wood that's available. But let's start asking more detailed questions and go beyond the sort of, these people are doing something different, they must be different people. And that's what I'm really looking forward to and fascinated by. All right.
if I can continue, yeah, a colleague of mine try to compare the cremation burial rite from this, let's say, Roman time Germanic people from Moravia and with this early Slavic, yeah, and there are really differentiations in the kind of the burying process and so on. It is now identified by a very specific scientific methods, yeah. But you are absolutely right, yeah, that there are really some interesting differentiations. And yes, I would say in generally we can connect this cremation or inhumations with some collective identities, but it is not total. Yeah, this is the most important message. I have a very nice example of it. The church, the cathedral in Frankfurt at Main. Inside this church, as the main burials, founders burials, there are double burial of 2 children, yeah, and one of them are inhumation and second cremation, yeah, and it is so amazing, yeah. You can imagine it is one of the most important church in early medieval Germany, or let's say Frankish Empire, yeah, and it was built on the double grave cremation and inhumation, yeah. Also, yeah, what does it mean? Yeah, this is so interesting. Yeah,
that's hugely exciting. It's an amazing example for sure. Yeah, thank you for that reaction. Anybody else have anything to add on this topic, or any other questions they would like to put into the group?
I just wanted to add a small thing, that yes, let's please move away from all the assumptions and that we focus on what it means. Like Jirri also said, and James rightly said, it's if we focus on what does it mean? So there's a transformation going on. There is this idea, you know, fire is powerful, the smell, the smoke. And if you start from that, regardless of what we think the cultures are, then we are able to have, I think, an open mind to observe differences, even if it's a tiny difference, that maybe the pyre was built differently. But if we assume that, you know, cremation is cremation, no, it's not. And even within certain cultures, it may change because people keep thinking, you know, being creative is not something we have only today, and that everything was static in the past. That's absolute bullshit. I think they knew way better what they were doing. They know way better the fuel, the temperature, you know, they can tell by the clouds if it's a good day for cremation or not. And so I think going more the direction of what it means and what you can express and how much of emotions can be involved will bring us way further.
Definitely, 100%. Very exciting. Yeah. Okay. If nobody has anything to add anymore, can we ask Frans to kind of do the round up, the last words that will be said on the topic? I'm sure not, but
I have to click. Yeah, I was asked to speak to say a few closing words, and I was actually terrified by that. But during the talks, I got some things have already been said. The first thing that I would like to say is that we have come very far from what has been taught to me when I was a student. We talked about, I got classes, of course, on the burial rites and with the cremation, teaching in the Netherlands, with the cremations in the north and the inhumations in the south, clearly separated worlds, with the Germanic people in the north and the Roman people in the south, with the heathens in the north and the Christian, all these dualistic models and thinking that we try now to get rid of. But there were already early doubts about this, because if Germanic people cremate their dead, why don't the Lombards do this in Central Europe? And the Western Goths in Spain, they also forgot that they had to cremate the dead. They all buried their dead. And the Lombards in Italy, they also buried their dead. There's hardly a cremation grave to be found. So what actually, I asked the teachers, what is actually Germanic? But they had no answers, of course. We got a little bit further when Patrick Geary called all these ethnic stories situational constructs, but I am an archaeologist who is not always very polite, and I call them the political and ideological fantasies of the few people that could read and write in the early Middle Ages and usually belong to the top of society. So the question is, what is the relation between all those things that we know from the written sources and migration? What is the relation between burial rites and the stories that we get from the written sources? Which is, it's a question. It's not saying that it is not possible that there is a relation. Maybe, Jiri, there is an interesting difference between what happens in the West and what happens in Central Europe. It's possible that there is a more close relation between groups that we know from the written sources in the Central Europe than we know from, we have to find out. On the other hand, what we try to do in the project that we had and where Femke was a part is to get a little bit away of this also top-down perspective, which is suggested to us by those writers from the early Middle Ages who write about the heroic deeds of kings and aristocrats and bishops and saints that create actually society. But what about, we asked about the hundreds and thousands of daily actions by the majority of the population. Do they not create society? They must have been thinking about cremation, inhumation, or other ways of dealing with the dead. We found human bones in river deposits from the 7th century. So they did many more things. We have excavated a settlement in the Western Netherlands where Femke analyzed the graves with bones from the Merovingian period distributed all over the site, and even skull fragments or complete skulls, by the way, only men skulls, distributed over in the ditches, in the gullies, in the pits. What's this? How do you deal with the dead in the early Middle Ages? And there's much more actually than cremation and inhumation. So what I think is incredibly important in this book is what we would call in our project the pan-European approach. What these traditional stories of early medieval Europe teach us is that after the unified Roman Empire, we get a fragmented Europe, falling apart in Alemannic, Frankish, Suebi, Lombards, Saxons, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, whatever. But as soon as you start getting away from that fragmented Europe idea and start asking what they shared, there are so many things that you can see all over Europe being shared by people. And one of them might be the cremation rites. That, and if you look at the underlying ideas behind the cremation rites, you might see that ideas are shared from England to the Czech Republic, from the Netherlands to Italy. And that is the big challenge, I think, that we archaeologists, we can say, no, we don't believe the ethnic interpretation, we don't believe the challenge is to come up with alternative ideas about what determines then the choices that they made. And that's why we were thinking about cooking the dead, and because it was based on a cemetery in the central Netherlands, the famous cemetery of Rhenen, where inhumation dominates the 6th century and cremation dominates the 7th century on the same cemetery. It must have been the same group, changing their burial rites from the 6th into the 7th century. And this continues into the 8th century when we consider the central Netherlands to be a Christian area. There's a bishop next to the cemetery, 20 kilometers further on. So why do people change their burial rites at this? And It might have been related to all kinds of changing ideas about values relating to dealing with food, dealing with bodies, changing perspectives on what the person is, from maybe a distributed person, maybe a fractal person, maybe, but maybe certainly not the ones that we have today. So what we need actually, and what this book is a fantastic example, is a pan-European approach. And that's what we also did in our project, to create a database that is not national. Because what happens today is that, like in Germany, they spend 14 million euros now to create databases on archaeology. They will be German databases. They have Italian databases. We have Dutch databases, Belgian databases, English databases, all national databases. And that is not very good. It's fantastic that they do this, but it's not very good if you want to get rid of the fragmented image of Europe, because fragmented is the top. And like Piketty, in one of his books, he had a chapter, and it says, what is it? Fighting aristocrats, divided aristocrats, united peasants, with a question mark. Now, DNA is showing us that people had family relations, genetic relations between the Netherlands and Northern Italy, between the Netherlands and Hungary, between the Netherlands. We have a cemetery with genetically related people in Northern England. And these cemeteries are more or less contemporary. They know that they have nephews and uncles and sisters somewhere else in Europe. They know. And this exchange of ideas, I think, is crucial for archaeology to get to contribute, but like James said, to another idea of early medieval Europe, an early medieval Europe in which people share many more things than what separates them. What separates is the king. The Frankish king is battling, and the other one. We don't excavate kings. We excavate people in the village cemeteries, and we want to have an interesting idea what their world of thoughts and ideas and values was. So I think this book is a milestone in that process, from 100 years ago and next 100 years in changing the debate on the cremation rituals. And I was taught a lot by Femke, of course, on cremation. I was a very ignorant person. When she started doing this research, and I said, oh, but then she can be a very convincing person. So I would actually, I cannot say but more than really congratulate you on making of this book. I think it's a milestone in terms of thinking about not just cremation, but in terms of burial rites in Europe. Also because of it's what I would call a pan-European approach. Congratulations, 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 and have lots of fun with what happens after today with the book.
Thank you so much, Frans, for so succinctly summarizing and also inspiring us with your words. That's very nice to hear. Does anybody have a reaction to that? Otherwise, I'm going to pop in the book and say, run to your online bookstore, Sidestone. You can either purchase it as a hard copy, or you can read the PDF online for free. If you want to download it, you'd have to purchase it. But yeah, that's totally worth it, because you're going to get 19 chapters full of cremation fun and very interesting perspectives.
Okay, thank you, Femke and Howard, for doing this.
Thank you very much for attending, and I wish you all a very good evening, and thank you for being part of this discussion.
Yes, thank you, Femke and Howard, for the amazing job, for pulling so many hours, and thank you for this beautiful piece. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Femke and Howard, and thank you to everyone at this session. It was absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lippok.
So, congratulations, wonderful book. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you, Jiri. Thank you so much, and so nice to hear from your side of the world as well. We need to interact more, and
we will.
Talk
We
more
will.
about,
We will.
Hey.
Bye.
So,
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
See you,
I'll shut it down
everybody.
now,
Thank you for
and
attending.
appreciate everyone who couldn't actually make the full event but brilliant. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Follow Archaeodeath on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.